Good evening. Thank you for joining us this evening to Speak Up Sex Trafficking Talks. My name is Rhonda Kuykendall, and I'm honored to chair the Fort Bend County District Attorney's Human Trafficking Community Awareness Team. If you are in the Community Awareness Team or on our team, if you could just raise your hand to let everybody know you're here. Thank you. I would also like to thank University of Houston Sugar Land as well, and especially for Jay Neal for his gracious sponsorship of both the room and the parking lot. Brian Middleton was elected as a district attorney for Fort Bend County in 2018. He made it his mission to focus on anti-sex trafficking efforts. DA Middleton believes in a multi-pronged approach to address trafficking, prosecuting traffickers and buyers, supporting legislation statewide, and education and awareness. And that's what brings us together this evening.
Good evening. I'd like to thank everyone for attending this event. It's a very special event. It's critically important to Fort Bend County that we raise awareness. The Fort Bend County District Attorney's Community Awareness Team is working hard, getting information out to our citizens so we can all be aware and be a part of the solution and prevention to eradicate human trafficking in Fort Bend County. So any information that you learn today, please share it. The way this works is that when you see something, you say something, but when you know better, you got to let other people know as well. So reach out to your friends and family and try to educate them on human trafficking so we can all be aware, so we can eradicate human trafficking in Fort Bend County and beyond. Thank you.
Just a little bit of housekeeping. At the end of our presentation tonight, we will be having a panel discussion. If you do have any questions, just jot them down and keep track of them, and we'll be asking for them at the end of the presentation. Kerri Taylor is the Executive Director of Unbound Now Houston. Unbound Now is located in 5 cities across the state of Texas: Houston, Waco, Austin, Bryan College Station, and the Dallas area. They also have locations in international countries, including Mongolia, Cambodia, and Indonesia. Here locally, Unbound Now Houston is an advocate agency providing CSAY, that stands for Commercially Sexually Exploited Youth, advocates to the Governor's Child Sex Trafficking Team. They are instrumental also in providing services and resources to adult survivors. Tonight, Kerri will be discussing Human Trafficking 101.
Thank you, Rhonda. I'm really excited to be here with you tonight. This is not a topic that most people like to just come and hear about on a weeknight, but the thing is, we have a lot of great things that are happening, reform in this area, and so I bring any information tonight to you with a great deal of hope. Let's go forward now. So here is the 3 things that Unbound Now focuses on. We are activating local communities. So what trafficking looks like in El Paso may not be the way it looks specifically in Houston, or the way it looks in North Texas might be quite different than in Houston. So all of us are free to work in our own communities and set priorities about what needs to be done, but everything falls into 3 primary lanes, and that's prevention and awareness, getting in front of as many students or vulnerable people as we can who might be targeted by a trafficker, and making wonderful presentations like tonight, a chance to educate professionals and community members. And then the 3rd leg of what we do is our most beautiful and terrible work, and that's watching and walking alongside the restoration of survivors of human trafficking on their journey to getting whole and finding their healing. So I think a really good place for us to start tonight is with the definition of human trafficking, and make sure we all agree on what we're really talking about. So you see there in the first paragraph on the PowerPoint the legal definition, what lawyers and legislators have come up with to talk about human trafficking. But really, if you understand that bottom sentence, you know what trafficking is. It's the sale of another person's body or their labor in exchange for something of value. And usually that something of value is money, but it doesn't have to be. It could be in exchange for drugs. It could be in exchange for rent. It could be in exchange for just a safe place to sleep that night. And often it is. We know that about 40% of youth who we find to be clear concern for trafficking, their first commercial sex act was in exchange for a safe place to sleep. And so when we're thinking about how to look in our community housing and their status in that situation is a really important thing for us to be looking at. The key in that sentence, I think, is that it's another person's body. Someone else is making the actual final decision about who will be sold, for how much, how many times, and they're certainly the person keeping the reward from all of that labor. So when we talk about trafficking, we could, tell stories tonight that would keep us all up about how human trafficking manifests across the globe. Child soldiering, baby selling, organ harvesting, even mail order brides can be a form of trafficking. But that's not what most young people in the United States, or especially right here in Texas, are at risk for. They are at risk to be trafficked for sex, commercial sex, or they are at risk to be trafficked for their labor. And so when we think about sex trafficking, I know that when I first started studying it, it became a much broader definition than I thought it was. Of course, your mind goes to forced sex work and those exchanges, but it also includes being forced to participate in pornography and have your image made and distributed without being reimbursed or having any say about how that's used. Being forced to dance in a strip club can be a form of human trafficking. And certainly any minor who is dancing in a strip club or is pictured in pornography is by definition a victim of trafficking. And again, that definition broadens. It broadened for me. I didn't really know that that was part of it. When we think about labor trafficking, it is happening in Texas and certainly right here in Houston. We have a lot of agriculture and migrant workers in that way. We have lots of new construction. We have lots of day jobs and temporary things. Any venue that requires a great deal of labor for just a short period of time can be a very risky place or a place where human trafficking really flourishes. And so I would say here in our city, it is very prominent in the hospitality industry, hotels, restaurants, catering, those kind of things where a lot of labor is needed to support a convention or to support, some kind of sporting event, that kind of thing. There are a lot of statistics, and I would love for everybody to just take numbers here that I quote with a grain of salt. It's not on my screen unless it's been replicated in multiple studies, but this is a very challenging place to gather good information, right? Traffickers don't turn in yearly earnings statements. They don't communicate with the IRS and turn in their income tax forms like we all do. It is an underground world that we're trying to figure out what is really happening. So again, you won't see this unless I really trust the source. But one thing I think the community really needs to know is that over half of domestic minor sex trafficking victims, those who are homegrown, those who are our own children, first met their trafficker online in some way, either through a text, on a website, in a chat room, on a platform like Instagram or Facebook or Snapchat or many others, and it happened on a tablet or a phone or a gaming station, something like that. And so I know that we will talk about vulnerable populations, and I have to be very careful because, yes, there are high risk. There are definitely places in the community where kids are more at risk than others to be trafficked. But anyone, any young single unemployed student who's online is somewhat at risk to be trafficked because of the people they're meeting on the other screen who may not be telling them who they are legitimately. And then another statistic I'd like you to think about is that some people see this strictly as a women's issue or something that only happens to girls. And by far, the majority of the victims are female, about 76% of them. But think about what that means. Almost a quarter of them are male. And I've seen one study that has that number up to 32%. And so we kind of have to shift our paradigm a little bit and broaden who we're looking for. Otherwise, we will miss those people if we have a very static view of who it is. About 27% of the victims are children, both boys and girls. And so we have to really be looking for the boys as well as the girls. When it happens to boys, they generally display the same risk factors that girls do, being homeless or having all of those adverse childhood experiences that brought them to foster care or brought them to detention or brought them to being on probation. Time spent in foster care is a very high red flag or indicator because of the trauma that brought that child there. And when they are triggered in any situation, what do? They run from that sheltered place. We don't have a lockdown system for our foster care. And so the fact that they're then on the streets and fending for themselves and someone is looking for vulnerable young people on the street, that's what makes them vulnerable. And then identifying as LGBTQ+ can be a risk factor, not simply because of that identification or that fact, but because when a young person does publicly come out that way, sometimes they may lose their support structure, whether that's their religious community or their families or their friends. And isolation is the name of the game for traffickers. They are looking for young people who are disconnected, who don't have the support system, and they're driving a wedge between them and the people who they should trust to gain this false sense of trust from them. So when it happens to boys, they tend to say, hey, this is how I survive, this is what I want to do. They call it exchange sex. And I just want to make you all very aware of the legal code, is that when it's a minor, you don't have to prove force, fraud, or coercion. Simply the fact that that minor is engaged in commercial sex makes it trafficking. And so it doesn't matter if they say they want to do it. By law, they cannot choose this for themselves. Boys are much less likely to have a pimp or a manager, but we are finding anecdotally they usually do have this older male figure who's a mentor, so to speak, and says, hey, this is how you can make it out here. Let me show you how this goes. Sets up appointments for them, takes a cut of the money. Sounds a lot like a pimp, really, but they don't look at it that way. So they're not identified as easily. There are way less services available for them, and we're not looking for them often. But another thing that we all need to realize as members of the community is that this is an industry driven by greed and by money. And so when you say that there's a $150 billion annual market, how do you even wrap your head around how much money that is? I couldn't. So my staff helped me do a little research, and we found that if you added up, I believe it was 2020, the yearly revenue of Starbucks, Target, Apple, and Google, and then you tripled it, you had $150 billion. And so when there is that much money to be made, there are going to be people willing to sell children, willing to obtain children for their own nefarious gain, and that's just the truth of it. So if I count heads, there are far more victims of labor trafficking than there are sex trafficking. But look at this pie graph. Where are the profits coming from? You know, almost 2/3 of it is from sex trafficking. So what would we expect to grow? And what are children most at risk for if that's where the money is to be made? And so we need to really be thinking that way as well. The average age of entry is said to be around 15. Most people fall into this life between the ages of 14 and 17. There was a study done a while back that only included minors, only included teenagers, that found that their average age was 12, but it was a little skewed. It didn't include enough of the population. But we know that if this is the average, there are far younger people, and there are older people. The youngest person that Unbound Now Houston has served was 4. The oldest we have served thus far is 46. So just saying, teenagers are most at risk. And just by a hair, the next most vulnerable group are what we call transitional youth, 18 to 21. So you're exiting foster care or exiting all of those things. You are graduating high school, going off to college, or entering the workforce. There are less filters, less gates for people to get through to get to you. If you trust the wrong person in that particular time of life, it can be a really bad choice that leads to a lot of pain. So we didn't have great objective information about Texas until in 2016. The University of Texas did a study called the Texas Mapping Project, and they published it in 2017. It says that about 313,000 victims of trafficking exist on our streets in Texas any given day. And of those, 79,000 of them are minors and those transitional youth I was talking about who are trafficked for sex. Now, there's nothing wrong with this study. It's a good study. There were good parameters, really well documented. But it was a survey study, right? And so we know that method inherently doesn't have as much participation. And where would the voices of children being trafficked by their own family members be counted here? How could you hear that voice? And what about those really too afraid of retribution from their trafficker? How is their voice going to be counted there? So this is a good study. It's a good starting point, but I just want to say I think these numbers are low, and most of my colleagues do too. This was an article that came out in the Houston Chronicle a few years ago that said Houston has more brothels than Starbucks. And I would just say way more, right? The trouble is there's not a big sign outside of it that says brothel, right? It just is, it could be a rundown hotel or apartment building that looks like this. It could be a house in a gated community that looks really nice. It could be a house in a middle-income neighborhood. It can be anywhere. Dr. Robert Sanborn from Children at Risk said that in Houston, it's as easy to order a child and have them delivered to your hotel room as it is to order a pizza. And that's a profound statement that Dr. Sanborn knows what he's talking about. So, to just talk about how it happens in Texas, we are consistently ranked number 1 or number 2 in the number of calls that go to the human trafficking hotline. Does that mean we have the most trafficking in the whole nation? It may just mean that we have more people engaged. I'll give us that. But we're certainly a hub, just as much as Miami or LA or New York or any other large city. And we know that 1 in 5 victims of trafficking will spend part of their trafficking experience in Texas, just because of the way our infrastructure works. So what is a trafficker looking for in a victim? Someone who's that young, single, unemployed student I was talking about, but particularly those who have low self-esteem. Some people say that's the number 1 factor. A history of abuse, emotional, neglect, physical, sexual. Lives under the poverty line. About 21% of children in Texas do live below the poverty line. And again, if you're poor, that doesn't mean you're automatically going to be targeted by a trafficker and exploited. But do you see how it could make you much more vulnerable to their promises of helping you find a job or pay for your books or get you nice things and experience things you've never done before? That's why that's a risk factor. Being a runaway, 46% of victims are repeat runaways. Orphaned or in foster care, those same things, they're also connected, right? And then the identification. And then how does it happen? Well, it sometimes happens through force, but that's really the least frequent way it happens. It is true that that does happen, but that's not the major risk factor. We've never served a client whose story was, I was in the Target parking lot and somebody yanked me out of a basket. Those viral stories I hear online, I've never encountered a real survivor who talked about it that way. Coercion, what is that? Really a fancy word for blackmail, right? You don't do this, we will do this. We'll hurt your family. We'll get your little sister. We'll put all these compromising photos we have of you now up online. And then everybody's going to know what you've been doing. Your pastor, your coach, your friends. And you may think, sitting there as a mature adult, there's no picture anyone could have of me that would make me allow myself to be sold. Well, that's why they don't target you. They target younger people whose linear thought is not really well developed. And they think, oh gosh, I don't want to do it. But maybe I will just this one time and all this will go away. Not realizing that now they just have more to blackmail you with. We do hear that story quite a bit. And then coercion can also just look like, you took my money, you let me pay for you to get your nails done, you stayed in my house, you didn't think that was for free, right? And that youth really did think it was for free. They thought it was because you loved them. And they feel disempowered and goofy for not having seen what was up, right? And that's coercion. Befriending, most survivors say they were brought into this trap by someone they really thought was their friend. Usually that's someone posing as a recruiter whose job is designed to gather as much information so that by the time you connect them with the trafficker, oh my goodness, that looks like my blueprint for a boyfriend or a protector or, an investor in me. And so the befriending part of this is very, very important. Again, almost all people say they really felt close and connected to that person who performed the recruiter role. And then law enforcement sometimes calls what we call the boyfriend method, the seduction method, the Romeo method, whatever you want to call it. It's a pretend or a false love relationship. I love you. This that we're doing right now, this is just for a little while. We're going to get married. We're going to have a family. We're going to be together. And it's such a convincing thing. It's such a well-maneuvered strategy that the person who's being targeted almost can never recognize it when it's happening to them. But you know who can? Their friends who are being pushed away now. Their friends who are not allowed to go along. And that's why prevention education in schools, in youth programs, and after-school places, kids know how to look out for one, or they know what's happening and need to be empowered to look out and find out, how can I reach out for help? Find that trusted adult. So again, most people do fall in through this romantic situation. The other things do happen, just not nearly as frequently. Traffickers will wear a mask and prey on unmet needs, right? So if you need love, they'll pretend to be your girlfriend or your boyfriend. You need a place to stay, they'll let you, they'll provide that. You're lonely, well, they'll not just be your best friend, they'll bring a whole group of friends that you can be a part of now, right? You need a protector, a pimp can certainly do that for a period of time out on the street. You have a dream that seems impossible, well, they know people in Nashville and LA, wherever your dreams lie. It's only when that targeted person kind of starts pushing back and says, I'm not comfortable with that, or I don't want to do that, or why do I need to be here, that the mask comes on, and then the violence is a part of the story, almost always. They would rather, manage them with finesse, but if necessary, they're willing to be violent at any time they want. I think other people will be able to talk about how it looks like when families traffic their own. Usually it's generational, sometimes it's quite organized, and the child may not be able to even recognize this. That's not normal. That's not what love is. And then gangs, I really can't speak with too much authority there. That's a whole nother way that it comes out, and I would like for law enforcement to address that. But it can happen in a lot of contexts. but primarily just think about what are children exposed to? Who are they talking to? So I'm blanking on the name. Javier Rodriguez from the Attorney General's office used to be with them, said that when we let our kids go into their room at night with a smartphone, close the door, it's like they're alone with 400 million other people if you have no safeguards, firewalls, those kind of things on that phone. And so there is going to be a predator or two or three that cross paths with your child online. Things that we consider safe, that everyone has, Instagram, Facebook, there are recruiters all the time soliciting young people, starting up conversations with them. What does that look like online? Well, here's a quote from an actual trafficker. Online, I look for those who post that they hate their parents, or they just got dumped by a boyfriend and seem emotionally isolated from family and friends. Even if they're normally happy with their support structure, I just need to catch them at that moment when they're vulnerable. Terrifying, right? Does anybody want to go back to junior high? Raise your hand if you do. I wouldn't, because there's always a day that you don't make the team, you mess up on a test, you have a fight with a friend. And if you post about it, my life sucks. I hate my school. My parents are so dumb, right? It's like moth to a flame. It's like a place where that trafficker just moves in and makes a friend. And how does he do that? They establish trust. So they'll look at the online profile, gather information about their interests and their friends, who they know, even maybe send them gifts online, like things they can buy different levels with on games and different strategies. They'll help them with that. And they just shower them with compliments and affirmations, which is what they're looking for, right? That's the hole in their heart that needs to be filled. And so they do that kind of thing online. They'll say things like, no one understands you, but I do. Not even your parents. They don't get you, but I do. You won't have to be alone anymore, because a lot of these kids do feel alone. Your life's hard. I can make it better. Let me show you how. I know how you can make a lot of money, right? You see the progression? Separating them from other people, but I'm the one who's going to be really good for you. And then they establish secrecy. They'll tell that child a secret about themselves. Now, don't tell anybody I told you that, right? And then they want it to be reciprocated. Now, you tell me a secret about you. Why would they do that? They're gathering information. They're going to use it to blackmail them and make their life difficult. Or maybe they're just figuring out information to feed to the trafficker to know where are the pain points in this person's life. And then they get the child to believe that the relationship is really trustworthy. Usually it's romantic. And apply pressure for those nude photos and sexy texts and that kind of thing, again, so that they can blackmail them. And then this is going on, right? Sometimes it can progress quickly. Sometimes they'll be patient and do it for a long time and then suggest a meetup. And then with all the information they've gathered, they threaten the blackmail and coerce someone into performing sex acts in exchange for money just to keep their secrets. So what would you look for? What might be telltale signs or indicators that someone is being recruited or groomed, and maybe there's this window of opportunity you could help them? And I ask you to really pay attention to these, because you know what we find? There's a really devastating statistic, is that most children have been exploited for 2 or 3 years before they're identified. And think about the trauma that can occur in that amount of time. So if we can see it sooner, connect them with resources sooner, they're going to have better outcomes than they would have. So that's the purpose of a meeting like tonight. So do they have tattoos or branding? And I'm not talking about scripture tattooed on their ankle. I'm talking about something that denotes ownership, something big with someone else's name. Why is that there? Or something that's maybe a symbol, a crown or an arrow or a teardrop. We served someone who had dollar signs tattooed on her cheeks. Those are indicators that someone views you as a product. And so, no, it's not always easy to talk about a tattoo, but you can just say, that's interesting. How'd you choose that? Tell me about that. Is their answer vague, or do they have a real story behind it? Certainly, any minor has to get parental permission to get a tattoo, so it's worth a conversation. They are not attending school like they used to. There's not making it to band practice or soccer practice or whatever it was before. And their truancy pattern might be really specific. It might just be that they're absent a few periods out of the day. They're always there in the morning, but maybe they miss the afternoon, or maybe they miss a couple of periods during the middle of the day and they can return. Those are very specific absentee patterns if they happen a lot. They're not performing as well with their grades. They may have an older boyfriend or an older girlfriend or older group of friends. Being involved in a gang is a really high-risk indicator. Now they're showing up maybe in new expensive clothes. They have designer bags, designer shoes. They're getting their hair done, nails done. Is that something they would normally afford at their socioeconomic level, or just at their age? Or is this significant? What is this change that I'm seeing? And then having an extra phone is very significant, because a trafficker will give them a phone. They may have the one that they've always had, that their parents are paying for, that they're texting their friends and their parents on, but there's this one that they're very hyper vigilant about, because guess what? If they don't answer it, there's a price to pay. And they send them messages about where their appointments are, and they track where they are on the planet. They have navigation on them, right? You may notice some sickness or injury, bruises, multiple bruises in different phases of healing, some old, some new, meaning they're getting them a lot. If it's not trafficking, something's wrong. And then just a change in their behavior. And I know that sounds very general, but just think about it. If someone's already really outgoing and gregarious and the life of the party, and all of a sudden they're quiet, they're not meeting your eye, they seem traumatized in some way, they're not getting what they signed up for. They thought they were getting a love relationship, and now it's forced sex. So it's not what they thought they were getting. And then if someone maybe already was kind of shy, introverted, but now they're dressing really provocatively, and they're using street terms or sassy language, that's also a coping strategy, and that's covering up something. So it's the change that's really important there. These are some hard indicators that a friend of mine from the FBI gave me, and if you were to notice these or find these on someone, a child that you were close to, it probably means they definitely are already being trafficked. So what do we do about this? The governor has made the child sex trafficking team. They've formed a model that they're building out across the state for survivor advocacy, for specifically for victims of human trafficking. And that's what we're doing here. So Unbound has a survivor advocacy team where we assess, we walk alongside them as long as they want our support as they're getting well, do comprehensive case management. But here's the really cool thing that law enforcement can utilize, is that we run a 24/7 crisis response. And so when we're called, we will be on scene within 90 minutes. Our average is about 60 minutes to a safe location that law enforcement wants us to be. And in that first 72 hours, we will be right by the side of that client and her or his family, if they're a part of the picture, and helping them go through that, get regulated, and then hopefully choose to be a part of our program to get better, but also maybe cooperating with law enforcement's investigation. And so it's a really awesome thing. We can help find shelter and help them navigate transition into a world without trafficking. They've only been many times around other traffickers, other victims, and buyers, and that's not a very healthy place to be. So as we go through, Just let you know, once again, that's our 24/7 response line. That's the National Human Trafficking Hotline, 888-373-7888. And if you have any further questions or want to get in touch with us, you can go to our website, unboundnow.org, or if you want our office, unboundhouston.org.
So now that we've covered what do we as community members need to look for in regards to human trafficking, we're going to switch gears a little bit, and we're going to talk about prosecuting human trafficking. Craig Priesmeyer and Ashley Harkness are the human trafficking prosecutors with the Fort Bend County District Attorney's Office. They are on the front lines of seeing firsthand what is happening in our streets and in our courtrooms. Welcome, Craig and Ashley.
Good evening.
And we are also extremely excited to be here to continue the conversation as it relates to human trafficking, not just in Fort Bend County, but statewide. And so Ashley and I, as Ms. Kuykendall already explained, are prosecutors at our Fort Bend County District Attorney's Office. That doesn't mean that we're experts by any means on any particular fact, but what we bring to the table is what we've seen and what we've heard, not only in the active cases that we have, but also the ones that have been processed through the court cases. And so we hope to just impart even just a little bit of information on what we hear when we sit down with advocates and a person who has survived the most traumatic portion of their life. And so without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into it. A lot of times,
We talk about trafficking, people think of, the movie Taken. Has everyone seen Taken? Liam Neeson makes that speech. We don't need to play it for you tonight, but we've all heard that. And kind of what Kerri talked about, maybe that is what happens. When we talk about what happens in Texas and what we're actually seeing in our courtroom, it looks a little bit different. And so we want to talk about what actually is sex trafficking.
and we have to follow the law. Whenever we prosecute or when we pursue particular cases, we always have to look at whether or not what we have before us fits what Texas has criminalized as trafficking. And then we've heard a little bit about it, but in Texas, what they've determined trafficking to mean is to transport, entice, recruit, harbor, provide, or otherwise obtain another person by any means.
And again, if a victim is a minor, if they're anybody who's under 18, then we don't have to prove the other aspect, which is the force, fraud, and coercion. So just by any means for a child.
And a couple of different examples of things that we've seen whenever we apply the law to some of the cases that we have. For transporting, it could be something as simple as just driving a victim to a meeting location from one place to another.
For enticement, it's going to be promises of money, respect, royalty. Those are terms that we see thrown around a lot.
Recruitment, oftentimes we hear the vernacular that we see up here right now, to knock or turn out another person. And we don't use those terms lightly. Whenever we see this kind of vernacular, it's things that we have seen when we look into a trafficker's phone or to a survivor's phone and the type of words that are being described amongst others within the criminal activity.
Talk about harboring, it's a place to sleep or stay. It could be at the trafficker's house, it could be in a hotel room, it could be anywhere.
And to provide, it's just as simple as asking the question, what is useful or necessary for that survivor?
When we talk about trafficking, we like to say it has kind of an umbrella of other offenses. So we can obviously charge trafficking of persons. That's one of our codes that we can use. We also see other offenses that fall under there. Solicitation of a prostitution, which just became a felony in Texas, or did a year and a half ago. We got promotion of prostitution, aggravated promotion of prostitution, which is somebody who has more than one person working for them. Online promotion of prostitution, compelling prostitution, and sexual performance by a child. This is not an exhaustive list of all the offenses that we could see tied back to trafficking, but these are the ones we see most often.
And the way that Texas works is that oftentimes when we see something like trafficking, the law allows for us to pursue multiple different charges against an individual so that, for instance, somebody who is compelling can also be charged with trafficking. And that's something specific in the statute. And like Ashley mentioned earlier, the myth that we often think about, and we say it as a myth because it's not what we often see. What we often see is what we see on the screen here. Open air prostitution, open air trafficking, online ads, and oftentimes hotel rooms that aren't too far away from the very street that someone who seeks to purchase sex from another person has maybe tried to do so.
So we talk about where human trafficking happens. We see it a lot, especially at the recruitment stage or the enticement. It's going to be happening online. It's going to be messages that are sent out like DMs to people they find, that traffickers find online. So you might see that over Instagram, we see a lot, but you might also see it in other places like Facebook, Snapchat, even Discord.
And every single app that we put on here is an application that we have seen in one of our active investigations that was either used for the recruitment or for the exchange of money. Some of you might even recognize the very top two apps as Cash App and Venmo. Just quick and simple applications for one person to exchange money to another person. Because now it's 2023, you don't have to just be up another person and have cash. A lot of finances are handled electronically, directly linked to someone's bank account. And those are the tools.
So that's all you need right now is you need a phone, you need a laptop, some way to connect to the internet, and you can find someone selling sex, or you can try to find someone that you recruit to being a sex worker for you. This is kind of an example. So a lot of these next slides are going to be things that we've seen in actual cases. This is a screenshot from a victim of trafficking's phone. When we looked at it in her Apple Pay, we could track the money that was coming in from someone who was purchasing sex from her, and then that she would then turn around and send that money to her trafficker who we identified.
Earlier we talked about some of the slang as it related to recruitment, something like knock or turn out. And we put this up here because it was some words that we started to see when we were looking at cases that we didn't quite think actually had a true meaning to them, that we thought they might be one-offs, but then we saw it again and again and again. And as we started to look a little deeper, we realized that there was some definition, there was some use to some of these. You'll see up there terms like daddy, family, and wifey, ism, choosing, update, and then we'll talk in more detail about the numbers, which on its face might seem like they are ambiguous. But the first time that we saw them, we thought the same thing until we started to realize what it is. For instance, 16. If we were to ask for anybody what 16 might mean in the term of human trafficking, and in more of the casual slang of pimping and things of that nature, you might wonder to yourself, well, what does 16 have to do with any of this? Until you start thinking about, well, what is the 16th letter of the alphabet? And if we track that, you'll see it's a P, and it often just refers to 16 meaning a pimp.
And 16 is something we see all the time. We see it in social media handles. We see it in pimps or traffickers referring to themselves as a 16. We've even heard recorded audio from undercover officers being approached by pimps out on Bissonnette with a guy calling himself a true 16.
Same with 304, where we have 16 being the person who might be referring to himself in some form or fashion as a trafficker. 304 has a different context, and it's applied to a different person. In this particular case, oftentimes it's used, if you remember the old digital calculators and you turn this upside down, yeah, as goofy as that looks, as goofy as that sounds, this is a commonly used, I guess,
in the same way, we see it on social media, in the same way that someone who holds themselves to be a pimp, they might call themselves a 16. Someone who's selling sex might call themselves a 304, or you might have a trafficker referring to the number of 304s that he has.
And we don't want to underplay just how popular this is. A lot of times when we speak with survivors and we start looking into some of the digital evidence and the digital aspects of trafficking, we will see names on Instagram that will be finished with a 304, or traffickers who name themselves as blank blank 16 just as a calling card or some sort of loyalty aspect of it.
These are just some emojis we pulled from another training we've gone to. They don't necessarily mean everything that they they meet up here. They could also be used for innocent reasons, but these are some things that we've identified pop up. You might see the ring for wifey or sister prostitute, the red heel. We've definitely seen the crown, a lot gets thrown around. And what's not up there is that emoji, the P, the blue P that you have on your phone. So we see that a lot.
And we've put up some examples, right? So we've talked to you about just some of the things that we've seen, but to show you in true application, these are direct messages across the top two of messages that have been directly sent to individuals that were recruited. And the first one here says, you know, here looking to appreciate some good hoeing you got going. True 16, come find out. So you see some of that vernacular being used, some of those things that were being sent to this particular individual who is being recruited.
And then he also, this is the same person, choose up, break yourself, and then giving his cash app. So we see choose up, break yourself a lot, turning to, you know, pick me, let me be your trafficker, let me be your pimp.
And then right below was the descriptor of an Instagram account for a survivor that we had in one of our cases, where she describes herself as a Virgo 304, loyalty, threw up the Cash App and the OnlyFans account, which in this particular case was used to supplement the income. You know, Ms. Taylor talked about how prevalent financial gain was in trafficking. I think that both Ashley and I would agree that behind any trafficking case we have is a motivation to get money. And we see that not only in the actual aspect of the trafficking, but in some of these other ways that the particular survivor is victimized, whether that be through OnlyFans, where their photos that were either known to them to have been taken or not known to them were now being sold online through the use of a private site.
These two, I guess, memes on the left, these were taken from an Instagram account for a person who holds themselves out to be a trafficker. These are just a few of many things that he posts regularly. Pimps are born, hoes are made, and tricks get played. She ain't paying you, she playing you.
The one on the right is another one of those recruitment direct messages that was sent for the very first time to one of our survivors before she was essentially recruited. I'm not going to read the entire thing, but within the body of this, you would see a theme that plays out that describes loyalty and royalty, crowns and other items that seem to be an uplifting, come join my team, come join my family, let me hold you up to a standard that I would expect you to realize.
And that message he had saved in the notes section of his phone, and he would just send it out en masse several times to different people.
And it's not too far to see. You know, we put this slide up here because of some of the pop culture and some of the things that are out there that talk about the very same acts and vernacular that we know through our cases to have existed. For instance, up in the top right, you'll see the little movie, The Best Little Whorehouse in Texas. And I know, you know, Dolly Parton played that role. However, in today's world, the way that Texas law holds out, what was happening in that movie, and you'll even see it here, those are lyrics to one of the songs that's sung in it. And as for pimps, pimps are something you don't need. To get your daily business done, are you listening good? Keep them leeches and bloodsuckers of the bathrobes. And I know how to use a gun. Nobody messes with my girls. In that movie, we showed you some of the crimes that we have at our disposal, and one of those was aggravated promotion of prostitution. That's when anyone manages, promotes, or invests in an enterprise or a family unit of 2 or more prostitutes. In that situation, Dolly Parton would have been committing aggravated promotion of prostitution.
We won't go through all of them, but the big one we always like to point out in the bottom left, UGK, pimpin' ain't dead, it just moved to the web. And that's exactly right. That's where we find where a lot of our sex selling and sex buying is happening is on the internet.
That was back in 2007. A couple of other memes that we've seen from some known trafficking or known trafficker Instagrams. And all this does is just show that the use of these terms, the use of the 304, is put out there in a almost uplifting message that they want you to be the best 304, that you need to be the most successful one, because if you are successful as a 304, that shows good on you in your what you do. Only a P will respect the 304 in you. Again, the idea and the theme that we often see that is about loyalty and respect as well as a family unit.
These are just some other ones we took from, these are all from the same person that we've identified as a trafficker. The 304 oath, which we won't read to you, and then down again on the left one, he talks about being a 16. And it does highlight that these phrases, 16, 304 ism, are used often. And so if you're looking for it, we'll look out for these terms.
And honestly, within the 304 oath, the most concerning line is the one right in the middle that says, I am a volunteer and not a victim. We hear that time and time and time again. Oftentimes when we monitor the jail calls of some of the individuals that are charged, they will always echo that sentiment that this person was doing it with me. They weren't a victim. Without understanding the concept that if it's a child, you don't need to show force, fraud, or coercion. It's a child. They don't consent to this type of activity. And then, of course, the idea that we know that coercion means a lot more than just what force would require, which is just the hitting or physical assault of another person.
We've got these next two slides in here just to show that we've identified the trafficking all over social media, even into TikTok. All you have to do is search hashtag 304, hashtag Houston, hashtag Bissonnette, hashtag pimp, and you will find a ton of videos out there idolizing this lifestyle. These are just three more that we found from the Houston kind of greater area.
And so when we talk about some of the apps, right? We talked about it before, but you know, as a person who might have a child or have a young adult who has access, like Ms. Taylor said, to the World Wide Web, and they've got access through that device that we all have on us. And similarly echoing that, when someone has access to the World Wide Web, it's equally as important to realize that the World Wide Web has access to that person. And so some questions that you might ask another person, a child, a student, otherwise, is what are those apps that you're using? Because as we all know, as we sit here today, apps get created every day. New apps are becoming more popular. It's changing every month, or so it seems. So to ask the question, what's popular now? What are you using? Who do you follow, or who do you let follow you? What privacy settings do you have on your accounts? Or do you have privacy settings on at all? And then additionally, what would you do if you got a DM from a stranger? And as we've seen, Ashley and I, oftentimes it is that DM that we showed you even before, which is the initial one that might just add a simple compliment in a time when someone doesn't feel like they've ever received a compliment before. That is the breakthrough to a vulnerability.
So these are just some warning signs for grooming to watch out for. Someone who becomes too personal too soon, turns you against your friends and family, offer you gifts or money, brings up uncomfortable topics, starts asking for new photos or new videos, and shames you or tries to blackmail you.
And so we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about some law enforcement response to the problem that we face. And we often look at it in two different categories, the supply side and the demand side. And there's a different approach to each side. As a two-sided coin is, oftentimes what we do, and a goal for any proactive operation, is the following.
So for proactive, we're trying to recover, identify, reduce, and prevent. So we're trying to identify people who could be traffickers and identify potential survivors who are maybe looking for a way out. And if we identify somebody and it's not the right time and they're not ready to talk, then we make sure that in our operation we have services available so that if and when they are ready, they know where to go.
Reactive operations, when they're not proactive, can be something as simple as the message that we're giving out through this talk right now. If you see something, you say something. Oftentimes, some of the biggest cases that we have ever seen came from a neighbor or an innocent just observer who thought that there was something amiss and made a call, reported something to CPS, that eventually got into the hands of a detective who followed up on that information and found out that yes, there is something more here than just a one-off. And we have a case where a neighbor happened to see a lot of vehicles coming and going and individuals coming and going from a simple house, and after a stakeout saw that it was a multi-state trafficking ring that was running girls from multiple different places on high-end escort sites.
These are just some of the sex trafficking operations that we've actually had in Fort Bend County, kind of combined both the proactive or just proactive against both supply and demand.
And then, of course, we always have to give out the information. I know that we're sitting here right now in Fort Bend County, and to that point, there is a number 2, for the Fort Bend County District Attorney's Office, 281-341-4460. We have investigators within our Division of Human Trafficking that will pursue and investigate crimes. There's a National Human Trafficking Hotline. You'll probably hear this number quite a bit throughout tonight because as the message is, speak up. Start to see something, say something. And that number is 1-888-373-7888. And of course, we all have a duty that if a child is believed to be physically or sexually abused, that we report it to CPS. And to that point, you can do it online or even from the national number 1-800-252-5400.
Criminal prosecution is an essential aspect of deterrence, but there is another method of attacking human trafficking, and that is through our civil remedies. As a county attorney, Bridgette Smith-Lawson created county regulations banning illicit massage businesses that promoted criminal activity, human trafficking. Tonight, Ms. Smith-Lawson will expound on her work in the anti-trafficking space.
Good evening, everyone. This is an unpleasant conversation, but a needed conversation for all of us so that we can be equipped to have an understanding of this blight that is affecting our community and also be able to help other people who may be faced with family members or friends who have been impacted by human trafficking. I am the county attorney, and I also have present in the room the chief of my regulatory division, Ms. Huma Ahmed, who works very closely with me on our regulatory support and in particular our fight against human trafficking. We are by far no experts in this field, but we are here to complement the efforts of law enforcement and complement the efforts of everyone who's trying to make sure that we keep people safe and that we rid our communities of human trafficking. So we want to talk about human trafficking in the business model, which was referenced earlier in the presentation, $250 billion industry. And so when you look at it from that perspective, there is a service being provided. And when you look at it from a service provision perspective, our office is using Remedies to go after the service providers, the people who are providing sexual services to our community. So the prostitution that you see, that you would normally think of, people walking down the streets and basically, parading themselves in a fashion to pick up someone, is not really what we're seeing in Fort Bend County. In Fort Bend County, we're actually seeing establishments, businesses sitting in our shopping strips right next to our Krogers, right next to common places that we frequent every day, and they are open and obviously providing prostitution services. And it might sound like a surprise, but it is here. So what businesses are we talking about? We're talking about motels, hotels, massage parlors in particular, bars and nightclubs, nail salons, and just sexually oriented businesses, and whether those are strip clubs, et cetera. But those are the types of industries that we're looking at that are fronts for prostitution and trafficking. So in this fight, at least from our office perspective, we're looking at it from a twofold. We want to help complement law enforcement when they go out and they have a sting, but we also want to educate our property managers, our real estate community, those folk who own commercial properties about the blight. So I'm going to split this up in twofold. So on the slides that the DA's office just presented, they talked about and had on display some of the recent operations that were successful, and the most recent one was Operation Happy New Year. That resulted in 29 arrests. I'm going to back up a little bit and tell you how we got to Operation Happy New Year. So, a couple of months ago, the #1 foot massage on Highway 6, which was located near a Kroger shopping store, had some arrests that took place there. And it had been under monitoring for potential activity, sexually oriented activity, trafficking. Once our office was made aware of it, we immediately sent out a nuisance letter to that establishment. That nuisance letter did a couple of things. It put the owner on notice that there was criminal activity taking place on their premises. And then it also put them on notice, too, that if they didn't do something about it, we were going to do something about it, i.e. the county attorney's office was going to take them to court and sue them civilly for the nuisance that they are basically promoting in the community. Now, what was unique about this case is the owner of that establishment did not know that this was going on. And we will talk about knowing our awareness of our business owners here a little shortly. But this particular business owner said that he was not aware. And he then had some conversations with our investigators and agreed to allow his establishment to be used as a front, basically so that law enforcement could go out, they could stake out, set up a shop, again, a massage parlor, and a sting operation. And as a result, law enforcement, the DA's office, sheriff's office, et cetera, they were successful in basically having a sting operation that caught a couple of Johns, quite a few, 29, that resulted in arrests. But for the letter that we sent out, right, to the owner, notifying them of the nuisance, and then the conversations, too, to get his cooperation, we would not have been successful in shutting down that business, #1, and then also utilizing that same establishment to make further arrests for people, Johns, who were basically purchasing sex right here in Sugar Land, Texas. So that's an example of a successful operation that we just recently did, and quite honestly, we're signing and sending those letters out quite often right now, because what we want to do for the business owners who say they don't know is to put them on notice so that we could at least get their cooperation, right? If we don't get that cooperation, then we can pursue the remedies in court to sue them civilly, to have them shut down and move their business someplace else. Now, we don't want human trafficking anywhere, but obviously we don't want it here in Fort Bend County. So when we talk about these landlords and property managers, some of the things that they should be looking out for, and not just them, us, all of us, what we should be looking out for when we see these different establishments are just some common signs are like primarily female employees working in a business, right? Evidence that those people are living at that business. And then strange hours. Most people don't go and get massages after 9 p.m., right? Massage therapists who are unlicensed, mostly male customers, massage prices below the general market rates, window coverings that block the view of everything inside, locked front door, you must be buzzed in, an employee indicating a need for a large tip. So I'm going to go back to that #1 foot massage. There are people who came in there for a legitimate service to get a foot massage, right? But there was another a la carte menu available that people who knew what to come there for would purchase or request. But in any event, if an employee is indicating that they need a large tip, that's a red flag. Employees working long hours are always available on demand. And then Googling the address or phone number brings up illicit advertisements or reviews. So back to that same establishment, the #1 foot massage, a quick Google search when we did it in our office popped up everything that you needed to know to make you aware that this was not just a regular massage parlor. And so we are finding that this is quite common here in Fort Bend County, and not just in Fort Bend County, Harris County as well. But again, what are we going to do about it? So some of those signs that I just reviewed with you all in terms of the blacked out windows, a certain kind of customer, traffic at late at night, 9 p.m., primarily female workers, people living there, all of those things are things that you all can look out for. Now, am I saying that every massage parlor, nail salon, et cetera, in Fort Bend County is bad? No, we don't want you all to have that takeaway, but we do want you all to be aware that we have a problem and that we're actively working to fight it here in Fort Bend County. So I want to talk about what the law says in terms of our civil remedies that we have available. Now, the Texas Local Government Code gives some guidelines for regulating massage parlors, and without going into deep into the statute and just reading law to you all, there is a standard and a requirement for massage parlors to be regulated, and that if they are unregulated, that injunctive relief and civil penalties is available against them, and also criminal penalties. Chapter 455 of the Texas Occupations Code also gives the district attorney, county attorneys, and the AG the opportunity, or the wherewithal rather, to bring a civil action against certain establishments. Then you also have the Texas DTPA, Deceptive Trade Practices Act, which gives you the opportunity to bring a civil case against an establishment. But more importantly, and which was applicable in the case that we had here with, that gave us the Operation Happy New Year success, was the Texas Civil Practice and Remedies Code, Section 125, which is essentially that nuisance letter, which we send out, and we've sent out quite a few at this point, informing the owners of the arrests or the criminal activity that has occurred on their premises, and the need for them to basically clean up their business, shut it down, or else we'll move in to do what we need to eradicate that establishment from our county. So now with that, typically what happens is we'll get a call, one of our investigators will get a call with law enforcement to let us know that a sting is about to occur. And so we'll have one of our investigators go out on site, and then he'll collect the information that he needs so that we can come back and handle our civil piece, because we definitely don't want to interfere with the criminal case that's pending, and we want to complement the efforts and not interfere. But our offices are working in tandem to, again, support the district attorney's office, law enforcement, and again, just do what we can for the all hands on deck approach that we all should have in fighting human trafficking. So again, we're not human trafficking experts, and our office does a lot of other things, but we wanted to make sure that we shared with you all the civil actions that we're taking to help make Fort Bend safe. And with that, thank you so much.
We have learned tonight how as a community we can become aware of sex trafficking. We've also discussed the prosecution of trafficking through both criminal and civil remedies. But there's something special about hearing directly from those who have a lived experience. Tonight I would like to introduce you to Lana Turner. Lana is a mother of two, a grandmother, a career paralegal, a cancer survivor, and a national advocate for sexual assault and human trafficking survivors. She is the author of Back to Beautiful, a memoir of her experiences as the parent survivor of human trafficking. Lana serves as a mentor, consultant, advisor, and public speaker for nonprofit organizations and victims' rights groups. She also supports local, state, and national leaders heading human trafficking task force groups in their mission to improve policy and protect victims from re-exploitation and criminalization. In this capacity, she has become a powerful resource with eyewitness awareness of the horrors of human trafficking. She is keenly effective because she lived through the nightmare. Welcome, Lana.
Good evening. I was sitting there and I have a confession. I didn't want to be here tonight. I was not looking forward to coming here and speaking with you all tonight. I'm preparing for my sharing tonight. All week long, I had this sickening feeling. I couldn't figure out why. It was like I tell the story hundreds of times and I'm used to speaking in public and I don't know what it is. And then on my extra long ride over here because of the rain and the traffic, it dawned on me that the reason I was so uncomfortable is because I wanted to talk about something that I hadn't talked about before in my story when I talk about my daughter. Today I want to talk about who are the monsters in our mix. It's been said that good and evil used to be as different as black and white. Now when it comes to right and wrong, light and darkness, it's all gray. 5, 10, 20 years ago, I never could have imagined that the question, who are the monsters, would be so hard to answer. I grew up in the 70s when kids played outside until the street lights came on, and our parents were comfortable when they turned the locks on the door and they tucked us in. They were secure, feeling like we were safe in our homes. They used to talk to us about stranger danger. Look out for the white van coming down the street. If your parents were like, I'm a parent now, they used to do other things that good parents would do. They set boundaries and curfews and create a safe space for open communication. They talk to you about not getting into vehicles with strangers. Insist your kids have a little extra cash on them just in case. You invest in extracurricular activities. You track your kids and their phones. You think you know all of their friends. By the way, I'm Lana Turner. And I am a good parent. I did all of the stuff that good parents do. And I thought I knew all of my daughter's friends. That was until one of her so-called friends lured my 16-year-old daughter away from the safety of her grandmother's care. He was a 37-year-old man masquerading as a 17-year-old college-bound guy. And she thought that he was a good guy, but he was not a good guy. She thought his name was Sean. Nope. And she didn't know, I didn't know Sean. I didn't know Sean when he took my daughter. But Sean knew me and my family very well. Sean had been grooming my daughter for a year, waiting and watching for the right time and the right day to strike. And when he did, his strike was so devastating. 10 years later, we're still feeling it. 10 years ago, my husband and I, we were away attending a funeral. And while we were there, Sean was inviting my daughter to meet him at the mall. When she got to the mall, Sean took her. And he and his friends did unimaginable things to her. She was drugged, she was beaten, raped, and repeatedly sold for sex for 8 days. She was forced to watch Sean and his friends rape and brutalize other girls. And when the pressure of our investigation to get her home became too much for him, he pumped her full of drugs and he tossed her body next to a dumpster behind a Walmart store. He discarded my daughter like trash. For 8 days before her return, my family and I saw the good, the bad, and the ugliest parts of humanity. When she disappeared, I did what most of us would do. I called the good guys. Because They swore an oath to protect and serve. And I thought that's what they would do in my case. But bias and bureaucracy and lack of training made law enforcement officers diminish her disappearance. And the officer who initially responded to my call, he, and I quote, stated, "We treat these cases like just another traffic ticket." Like far too many people in our community, he assumed that because she walked out of the house on her own to go meet what she thought was a friend, that she had to be a runaway. He could not have been more wrong. Shortly after being labeled a runaway / traffic ticket, 911 calls appeared on my daughter's phone, and her car was found abandoned in the middle of the street. The police realized that she was not a runaway, and they heightened the alert from runaway traffic ticket to trafficking victim. A tidal wave of police officers, local and federal, began to join the hunt to bring her home. And as they searched her room and her computer, my house began to look like a crime scene. And she wasn't taken from my home. Remember, she walked out of the house on her own. But Sean had established an emotional connection with my child in the devices that I purchased, in a room that I decorated, and in a house that I paid for. I locked the doors, but Sean was able to lure my daughter right out of them. So my house was the crime scene. And despite the odds, my daughter was returned to us physically. Emotionally, she's still trying to find her way back to herself. And since then, I've worked to prevent anyone else from suffering as my family have suffered. I've focused on educating potential victims by sharing how my daughter was groomed, lured from our home, taken to another city. She was drugged, branded, raped, photographed, marketed, beaten, and sold. Recently, as I was sharing the story, the word sold began to ring loudly in my consciousness. Sold. I couldn't ignore it. Like so many women and children, my daughter was traded for money. For something to be sold, there must be a buyer whose interest drives demand. So today, I don't just want to talk about the sellers. I want to talk about the monsters, the other monsters in our mix. I want to talk about the men who refer to their vices of purchasing sex as a scholarship fund, the men who make locker room remarks like, if she's old enough to pee, she's old enough for me. Today I want to talk about them, the customers who incentivize crimes that make girls like my daughter a commodity, the crimes that make little girls and boys disappear from their front yards and on their walks to and from school, the sex trade that make girls think they're going to meet a friend before they realize they've become enslaved. Let's talk about those people, primarily men, who fuel the callous business we call the human trafficking. As we sit here today, statistics show that more than 20 million people are being trafficked worldwide. 20 million. Children account for about half the victims of human trafficking. In fact, the average age targeted by trafficking is between 11 and 14 years. Those numbers and statistics are sickening. But I didn't come here to talk to you about statistics. I didn't come here just so you can learn some statistics, just for learning's sake. I'm here to put a face to the victims and to ask you to do some very specific things. So the next time you or someone in your circle of influence clicks on an ad to purchase an erotic escort or a massage or child porn, I want you to help them to think. The next time you're at a bachelor party or a bachelorette party and someone in your circle of influence asks a dancer to give them something extra, help them to think. The next time you or someone you know stops by a massage parlor on your way home from work and asks for a happy ending, ask them to think. Maybe you know someone, the bold ones, who frequent the Bissonnette Strip in Houston to pick up a girl or a boy for a good time. I want you to have them ask themselves some very specific questions. Is this girl old enough to consent to sex? If she does, why is she consenting to sex with a stranger? Pay attention to the bruises on her body, because bruises and solicitation usually equal one thing: coercion. For God's sake, does her limp body or her slurred speech give you an indication that she even knows what you're doing to her? Practice some good old-fashioned empathy and ask yourself, what if this girl were my daughter, my sister, my mother? Would you want them to be sold for sex? If your answer to any of these questions is no, tell them this: a girl is someone's daughter. She was my daughter. And for 8 days, she was screaming for help because all she wanted to do was go home. For 8 days, I lived through hell, not knowing if my daughter was dead or alive. I prayed that I could just hold her, comfort her. Tell them this: you, the buyer, are the mass monster in our mix. You are in partnership with the predators and pimps who visit children through their video games, through their phones, laptops, and even their baby monitors. These monsters who whisper when we're not around, they visit our children and ask that they open doors while we're asleep. They ask them to meet them at parties that never happen, and at the mall and at parks and around the corners. Tell them you, the buyer, on the front line of fueling the sex trade. You create the demand that makes it so easy for pimps and predators to turn people into products. The supply to be sold for your perverted pleasure and the traffickers' gain. Today, let's unmask the ones who we don't talk about enough. I'm ready. I am finally in a place with the recovery of the crime that was against my family to unmask these people and confront these monsters. The fathers, the husbands, the doctors and lawyers, the preachers, professional athletes, soccer coaches, and sadly, even some people in uniform. They stand in our grocery store lines and they sit next to us in churches. The customer of the sex trade are ordinary citizens. And that is what had me sick to my stomach. That's what keeps me on alert every day, thinking, are you the monster? Are you looking at my daughter to be your next purchase? Some of these people are simply naive to the fact that they're funding human trafficking. Others just don't give a damn. Either way, they're guilty of a crime. So we have to continue to prosecute the sellers and stop coddling the people who feel the demand for this robust business. $153 billion, right? I'm proud to say that I live in a state that agrees with me. Texas was the first state in our nation to make solicitation a felony. And that's good for Texas, that's good for us, and good for our children. My daughter beat the odds when she came home. She didn't do it alone. She had a family and friends and concerned officers who fought to bring her home. The most important word being fight. We can't continue to sit in our comfortable homes, casually swiping through Amber Alerts and offering the meaningless cliches and bless your heart platitudes. We have to do something. We have to get in the fight. That begins with starting to talk about those people that we don't talk about. That begins to take this story and share with other people about how my daughter, a 16-year-old, beautiful ballerina, cheerleader. She wasn't from foster home. She wasn't from low poverty family. She wasn't insecure about herself. She was your average all-American girl. But somehow they found their way into my home, into my gated community. And my family has suffered tremendously since then. And if you continue, if our citizens continue to not talk about this issue, it will come knocking on your door, just like it did mine. I'm so happy that I did show up today to speak to you all. And I hope that my transparency here will motivate you to get in the fight, to do something about this. And most of all, those buyers need to know you have more power than you know, than you think you do. You have the power to diminish the demand. We can stop human trafficking one girl at a time. I thank you all, the district attorney's office and the sheriff and everyone else who's here to support human trafficking and this awareness campaign. Thank you for all that you do.
Miss Lana, thank you for the courage to come tonight. Rich Love used the experience of surviving child sex trafficking and abduction at 16 years old to embody a true pillar of strength, beating the odds to overcome multiple jail, rehab, and institutional incarcerations. In October 2021, Rich Love will celebrate 10 years, or she celebrated 10 years of being sober from a $200 plus a day meth and crack drug addiction. Rich Love has received multiple awards, including the Real Beauty, Real Woman Activism Award and the Black and Natural Pageant Blogger of the Year, and also the No Trafficking Zone Impact Award, inspiring women to live mentally and spiritually healthy lifestyles while growing and healing from past traumas. Rich volunteers most of her time to walk alongside other survivors, survivor leaders, advocates, and nonprofits to garner an inside look into how working together brings light to darkness. Most known for speaking in treatment centers, rehabs, news outlets, and various media platforms. You may find her performing in schools, in churches, and proving that God can give you joy if you only believe in a brighter day. Rich testified this past legislative session with 3 anti-trafficking bills at the Capitol and on behalf of the No Trafficking Zone bill, which passed in 2021, keeping kids safe and raising the penalties for offenses within our school perimeters. Please welcome Rich Love.
Wow. It's crazy to hear about yourself from someone else. First of all, thank you guys for being here. I think it's very important to speak up, but it's also important to speak informed. There are a lot of people that have heard about human trafficking, but it's always something that you just hear about. You kind of hear like viral stories of, oh, I almost got taken from the gas station, or just different things, and people don't really personalize it until it's something that hits home. It's someone that they know, it's their cousin. I get calls and DMs all the time, you know, kids that are too afraid to speak to their parents that are, you know, I have this friend that they have these signs, you know, what do you think about that? So it's important to speak up, but it's also important to speak informed. So for me, it was a wake-up call, because this person right here that you see was a child. I was 16 years old. I was going to school every day and getting picked up by different men and women of much older years than me, and going back to school with drugs and drugged and going back home to my parents, not knowing any different. I was a band geek. I took piano lessons. I come from a 2-parent home. We lived in a 2-story house. It's not the typical scenario that you think of. And there were literal missing signs and posters everywhere. That was the wake-up call. What does it look like? Does this look like someone that's a grown woman? Because this is the age, this is what I look like when a woman saw me running away from home, and here I am thinking, oh, it's a woman, I can trust her. You know, a lot of times I had a very, very close relationship with my mom, so you're thinking a woman, you're like, oh, okay, I'm looking for a place to stay. The vulnerability is a place to stay, some food. It turned into drugs. It turned into orgies, and it turned into being trafficked. She saw me out, and she saw that I needed a place to stay, and she lured me in, and I'm thinking, oh, she wants to help me. I didn't know any better. She wanted to help herself by getting rich, making money off of me and other girls. And it's so mind-blowing to think of people that look at other human beings as products, because if you do a drug, you can only do that drug once. Once it's gone, it's gone. If you go buy something, once it gets broken and old, it's done. But a human being can be bought and sold over and over and over again. And I just wonder, how can you look at someone and not think, this is someone's son, this is someone's daughter? Like, what piece of humanity are these people missing? Quite a lot. So human trafficking looks like a lot of things. So I didn't grow up in the era of body positivity, love yourself, 400 pounds, yes, you know, be who you are. I grew up in the era where it was, do these pants make my butt look big? You know, it was the total opposite of now. Now we want our butts to look big. But back then it was, you know, skinny, the Kate Mosses and all those very thin models. That's the era that I'm from. So I developed the eating disorder. These are some of the signs. A drug addiction. A lot of times I was drugged, gang raped, and it's so interesting to hear the stories. And as I hear people give their testimony throughout the years, I realize that they're all so similar. I don't feel much different from any other survivor, because there's always like a key part that's like everyone else's. And I think that line that they said earlier about being a volunteer, I thought I was just a bad kid. I ran away from home, like I got what I got. I was too afraid to go and face my father, to face my mom. So I chose the streets. I thought I chose the streets. I thought that these people cared about me, the different people that I was sold to, but these things follow me for the rest of my life. The transactional relationships, the failed marriages that I've had, because it's so hard to unlearn what love is, that your body matters. I became very secretive, and I always wondered how this could happen. No one has a child and they say, you know, when my child gets older, I want them to go through the worst traumas ever. Every parent is like, well, my child's gonna be the president, they're gonna be a football player, they're gonna be the greatest thing. I mean, who says, I want my child to suffer? That's a nightmare. Nobody wants that. Although, in the treatment centers that I was in, there were parents that trafficked their own children. That was another wake-up call for me. I came from a great home, and I would hear stories about fathers injecting their daughters with heroin and trafficking them and impregnating them. And I was like, oh my God, like I was running away from home, and there's kids like really going through some real life stuff here. So it could happen to anyone. This picture is the clue in the missing puzzle piece. Everyone would always ask me, because a little background, I started in radio, I started a blog. I had no idea that I was gonna start speaking and telling my story or my testimony, any of that. And I would have people come on my show, it was called The Testimony, and nobody knew my story. I didn't even know my story. No one was saying human trafficking, trauma-informed care. It was, oh, that's a bad kid. You knew what you were getting into. Oh, that was a pimp. And people would always ask me, how did this happen to you? I really didn't have an answer. I didn't know. I didn't understand. It wasn't human trafficking back then. I thought I was a prostitute. This picture, my mom passed away in 2020 unexpectedly. And I asked her months prior, I saw this picture and I said, man, I used to be so skinny. And she was like, yeah, I remember that. That was the age that you started to eat your feelings. And in the pandemic, as all of us, if you didn't have a moment to think, what is life? What am I here for? Like, the pandemic did it for most of us. And in that moment, I thought to myself, what happened at that age? At this age, in first grade, I was jumped and molested on the last day of school by one of my classmates and his brothers. And that's not the most traumatizing part. Even though that is the trigger that started the change in me, the problem and the most terrifying and hurtful part is when I went to my teacher and she did nothing. She literally sat in the chair in the classroom by herself with me running up to her with my clothes disheveled, crying and bloody, and just looked at me. Didn't call the cops, didn't tell the principal. I walked home that day thinking, did I do something wrong? I was assaulted. My innocence was taken away, and I was not protected by someone that was supposed to protect me. And only now do I realize what that did to the rest of my life, how I look at authority, the very much imposter syndrome that I have today because I felt worthless. That you don't even take the time to at least call my parents to say something. Now, if my parents found out, they'd probably be on the news. Like, my parents were very protective. But I just think, how could someone be so cold and callous to allow, it happened, but you don't do anything about it? There are so many kids that are dealing with things that nobody knows about. And the Texas Adolescent Treatment Center that I was in, my roommate was being raped by a grown guard in our treatment center. And when I realized that he was abusing other people in regards to relationships and all these different things that were happening, bribing us with food and just chaos, I went to the authorities at the school, at the treatment center, and I told them what happened, and they looked at me like I said what I had for breakfast. Not shock and appall and awe, none of that. Nothing happened other than he was gone. No cops, no investigation, no questions. So that leads me to believe this must happen a lot. I can't imagine what type of reprimanding that happened. And these places are not going to incriminate themselves by bringing, the media and all that into this. This is happening so much. And the biggest factor to me is the shame. The shame of someone taking your body and doing things. Maybe you think that you want to do that, but when you're a child and you're silenced, it starts at home. I think we know, we've heard all the statistics. I'm just bringing it down to the basics. It can happen to anyone. Boy, girl, old, young. I think one of the biggest factors is allowing you to speak freely, because when you have something going on with you, it's not easy to maybe go to your dad or go to your mom and say, well, this is how I'm feeling, or this is how someone is making me feel. If a child is afraid to go to the very people meant to protect them, there's a problem. And I think if we can remove some of that, what I think my child should be. Now, this isn't always the case, but I'm speaking from my perspective. I love my dad to death, but he was so overprotective. I couldn't be who I wanted to be. I had to dress a certain way. I had to speak a certain way. Everything was just, it needed to be this cookie cutter thing that he wanted me to be, right? And I felt like nothing would ever be good enough. So I said, you know what, YOLO, we're just gonna do whatever we want. It's not gonna be good enough anyway. Just do whatever you wanna do. Removing the shame. There are so many people that are so ashamed of things that are out of their control. The shame is really what kept me down the longest. And only now, even though I've been speaking for years, only now am I completely free of the bondage that I mentally put myself in. You know, a lot of people think of trafficking, of what the media shows, the cages and the bruises and the track marks, and that happens. It's real. It's not just in the movies, it happens like that. Mine was psychological. I thought that I wanted to be there. I thought that these people cared about me. I thought that this is all that I was ever gonna be. I think of some of the things I did, even after the trafficking, some of the jobs that I did, and I just think like, the world is so much bigger. There's so much more that we can do, but when you're being told that you're nothing, that no one's gonna want you, that you're ruined, and you're hearing it over and over in the grooming process, it's really hard to undo that. One of the biggest things that I like to tell youth is the power of no. A lot of times, out of your control. Trafficking, people are raped, a lot of it is forced. But I think of, as an adult, how I carried not being in control of my body as youth. All the people that I had sex with, or that I did things for, not even sexually, just other random things, because I was too afraid to say no. Those 2 little letters, men, women, anyone, not just trafficking, it is so hard to say no sometimes because you don't want to upset people. You don't want to hurt their feelings. I didn't want the tension and that icky feeling like, oh, I disappointed this person. You know, like we tell kids, like, run up to Uncle whoever, my friend, or we pass babies around. Oh, look at the newborn. There is so much power in just saying no. Self-confidence, that is huge. I had none. I did not love myself. I thought I was worthless. Even before being trafficked, I did not love myself. I was so lost. So I had a lot of the vulnerabilities, the overweight, the depression, the bulimia. I was definitely someone that they chose for a reason. So today, I have overcome so much, and I stand here as a college dropout, talking on a mic in a college, and I'm like, oh, wow, look at God. What I've overcome is not just from this list, but this is just a quick breakdown. Some of the trauma that people look at some survivors and they say, oh, wow, they look at me now and they say, I would never have guessed. I remember the first time I told my testimony, their mouths dropped. They were like, oh my God, because you don't always have to look like what you've been through. And I just want to briefly talk about some of the things that I've overcome. Agoraphobia. I remember not being able to drive more than 10 miles past my house because I would get anxiety and panic attacks. Born in Houston, Texas. Last year, I picked up and I moved to Atlanta. This is someone that didn't want to fly, couldn't travel more than 10 miles past their home. I picked up and moved to Atlanta, and in June, I'm moving to Nashville. That is something that I've overcome. Pharmacophobia from all of the drugs that I've done, being able to take medication again comfortably. Claustrophobia from being held down, abused, beaten, raped. I would cringe if someone tried to hold me, man or woman, like just, ugh. I hated that. So that, I remember I started working at an engineering firm, and I worked on the 15th floor, and people couldn't understand why I kept taking the stairs. I was claustrophobic, and I would have rather taken the stairs 15 flights than to get into an elevator. Today, I'm 11 years sober from crack, meth, shooting meth, cocaine, ecstasy, any drug you could think of, I was doing it. I wanted to escape life. I didn't want to feel anything. And it started in middle school. I woke up October 4th, 2011, completely clean and sober from drugs. That is miraculous. Not just street drugs, no caffeine, no cigarettes, and no alcohol. 11 years. That is all God. I'm a public speaker. I make 6 figures in tech. Mind you, a year and a half ago, I was sleeping in my car. A year and a half ago. So if you ever think that you can't do anything or things are impossible, please just know that anything is possible if you just continue to keep moving forward. I love myself, I'm mentally sound, I'm self-sufficient, I'm living proof, and most importantly, I'm happy. I'm happy, and I speak because I want other survivors. We're all survivors of something. It's not just human trafficking, it's not just domestic violence. People are abused as kids, or maybe they didn't have food, or we've all survived something, a loss. Like, everyone is a survivor. That's what I believe. And I want for other people just to know that anything is possible. Speaking has allowed me to do things I never imagined. It gave me purpose, because I could be dead right now. So many times I think of getting in cars with people, doing all types of indirect suicidal acts. Because I wasn't gonna just point blank kill myself, because in my Christian faith, I believe that that's just not the right thing to do. But the way I was living, I was indirectly trying to commit suicide. And today, with the help of all of these people that you see on the screen, I'm able to live a life of purpose to give other people a light and a hope. And I want for everyone in this room to know that you can be the change. Thank you.
While we strive to bring awareness on an academic level, it is the stories of strength and resilience that resonate with us. Thank you for being vulnerable to help others and to understand the devastation, but also the courage and the empowerment of not only surviving, but thriving. Thank you. We are now going to go to a panel discussion. There are microphones between each of you, so you can share the microphones. Shama is going to help me. So does anybody in the audience have any questions for anybody on the panel? If you do, please say who you want to ask the question to and then what the question is.
What advice would you guys give to someone who is wanting to get into the fight against sex trafficking, but doesn't know exactly where to start or what the right step is to take?
I'll answer. Start in small groups. Start with speaking to your friends about human trafficking, educating them on what it actually looks like. Like I spoke about earlier, a lot of people are naive to what human trafficking are. When you go to the strip club and they ask dancers to do other things, those things are trafficking. So I would say start in a small group, educating your friends.
Thank you.
I just want to follow up on that, yes. I can tell you how powerful it is when a man, a boy, a male is speaking about human trafficking. That alone, wanting to be aware, that sends volumes, because that's where it can start, because a lot of the buyers are males. They're women too, but a lot of them are males. So just the fact that you want to make that change, like, just keep that, because when I've been places and men are speaking about it, it's so much more powerful. So I love that question. Thank you.
I just wonder why we don't have this, or just sessions like this in high school, or, either with the parents or with the students, because that's really going to help. Like, if one peer, if they know something is going on, if you guys do a sessions like this there, they will come forward and speak up for their friends if someone is, going through something or someone is being abused. I think there should be more sessions like this. I think it's more needed in high school. And I think parents should be invited too.
I would love to have you talk to your legislators about that, because we actually had come really far, and it was mandated that there should be the sexual abuse and human trafficking prevention education in schools. And not this session, but last session, an amendment was put on a bill, widening that made it a parental opt-in. And by what that means is that instead of just opting your child out if you didn't want them to participate, you had to sign a paper, and it was made really difficult to get a hold of that paper. It had to come in a certain time period. It couldn't be connected to any other permission slip. And so just as an example, we've probably educated, I don't know, the numbers over there, just thousands and thousands of students. We were doing this prevention education for Pearland ISD, seeing their 8th graders and their freshmen every other year. So they knew that by the time they graduated, they had gotten it. When the parental opt-in came in, before we were seeing about 98% of the students. With the parental opt-in, we saw 21% of the 8th graders and 23% of the freshmen. Because the paper just doesn't get home, and there's just so much to do. And I empathize with schools who have to do lots of trainings, but this one is life or death, and it's very nuanced, and it really needs to be spoken about, and I'd love survivors to be featured. And so there's really, there is curriculum there. The process has just gotten a lot harder to get in front of the students. So your voice needs to be heard.
Let me add that there has been a bill that's been filed this legislative session, which will take it back to the opt-out. This next slide, I'm going to advance it really quick. On Facebook, there's a group called Our Voice in Texas. I will post that bill tonight when I get home up to the top, send it up to the featured section to let you know how you can advocate in support of that bill to change the opt-out to opt-in, opt-in to opt-out.
Hi there, Jennifer Lane, Sugar Land City Council. A question for the district attorney's office. So how do these criminals, have you noticed, how do they pivot? Like you talked about signs on social media. If they find, criminals watch, what you guys are looking for, and then they pivot and they change. How often do you see them changing their strategy?
A lot of the change that we see actually comes in the different platforms that are being used. So, 5 years ago, and I could get off on my history, TikTok wasn't a thing, it was a different app. It was Musical.ly, before it was purchased by a different company that then became TikTok. Even since then, there's been new messaging platforms, like WhatsApp was a creation, now Signal, and different ones that kind of give a more encrypted access to the kind of messaging that occurs. And so the only kind of way that we see a lot of the transition of trying to be reactive to the way that law enforcement is approaching cases is just in the use of different digital applications. At the core basis of what we see, though, in a lot of our cases, it usually turns out the same. There needs to be a victim, and there's a person who's trafficking that person. The money is there, and then it's just the location might always be the same place. It's just, it starts to change when we go out of state to different places like that. I will say, though, that a big change that occurred back when September 1st of 2021 happened, when solicitation of prostitution cases became a felony. I know we heard from a speaker today that talked about how that was the first state, we are the only state to have created that. That Ashley and I started to see an almost immediate impact in the Houston area as a result of that. A lot of individuals left because they felt like felony offenses were going to be levied against everybody. I think they got brave again. A lot of people have come back. But we would hear the chatter about how they would hit I-10 and head out of east or west. And so the laws are working. The laws have created a fear amongst a lot of our traffickers as well as the individuals who are purchasing. But I think that what we do at the District Attorney's Office, at least in Fort Bend County with law enforcement, is that we continue to train ourselves and to educate ourselves to stay one step ahead. And so we try and prevent the ability for a trafficker to get ahead of us. So I hope that answered the question.
I can do a follow-up.
Sorry, one follow-up. So my understanding, these types of relationships are like similar to domestic violence. These victims become very close, can become very close to their abuser and very hard to get away, and they don't want to self-identify. So I know we want to have some discussion in the schools, but the kids do need to be able to feel like they have a safe place to talk. And I know you guys are available for all of those interviews and things, but I happen to work for Parks Youth Ranch, where we have kids in foster care. And so we're trying to be very vigilant with our trainings, with our social workers, our youth care workers, and our staff. But I do think that our training for our schools, our public schools, does need to be enhanced, and to help the staff on the front lines, help them identify like what's going on behind the behavior with kids, so that they can, inquire about that and they have a safe place to talk about that. And also, there's a Dr. Roberts who was at Lamar CISD. She goes into advisory classes. She works for, oh my gosh, it's escaping me at the moment. Go into an advisory class and ask the students if they could nominate who they would consider to be a mentor. And going through all the classes, these kids would start, sifting up to the top, and then bring those kids in and kind of coach them on if someone comes to you, because usually it's peer on peer. A student is going to tell another student what's going on before they tell an adult. And so, that's if you want to know, like in schools, like what you could do as leaders inside the schools is to know where to go if someone comes to you, you notice bruises and things like that. The steps to go talk to an adult and report that. So it's going to take some leadership inside the public schools from the kids too, to be able to get that information to the adults. So anyway, thank you for the discussion today.
My question is for, I guess, anyone at the district attorney's office here. Have you all considered, if you haven't done this in the past, spoken to, you all have an enormous amount of professional athletes that stay around, very in this vicinity. Have you all partnered with any clubs, NFL, NBA, Rockets, or anything? Or do you have this in plan in the near future?
I don't think we do. That's not something that I'm familiar with, but it does sound like it's something that could be a good idea.
It is. It's the athletes have a huge influence on children, and this isn't discussed in rookie symposiums, et cetera, and it's a different take. You had a professional athlete in here tonight that was willing and kind of felt uncomfortable, not because of what he's doing, but I understand. I listen to the other side of it. Sometimes they get blamed, and I've seen them get, blamed for things that knowingly they weren't there, but I think people like you all could help ease that in a minute, and you will get backing from Texans, Rockets, Dynamo. You will get that backing from it, especially if you get one or two players off that team to follow you. That's something I would consider doing, especially with who you have around you.
I do think that's a great idea, so thank you.
You're welcome.
I will say there's an organization that Rich is represented to called the No Trafficking Zone that is partnering with NRG Stadium to educate all of those vendors, and their advocate. Unbound actually has advocates at every home Texans game, and I think those are partnerships we hope will be replicated nationwide, really taking NFL and all of the other stadium affiliations and owners with their teams and letting them have a voice that this is not something we tolerate in our league, and our star athletes don't, this isn't a cool thing. So I think you're onto something that probably could be expanded with that kind of a partnership.
Yes, I have actually heard of it. It's a difference between the stadium and homes versus the players.
Right, the personality.
That's something.
And I'm going to follow up on that a little bit because you asked the question about what you can do. The gentleman that he is speaking of is a professional athlete, and he heard about my story, and he came out to support, to help to spread the word. When they're having those locker room talks, he will be the one who's saying, that's not right. You can be that person as well.
Okay. We have room for probably one more question.
Okay, so this is for someone who's in like the district attorney's office. So after someone has been rescued from human trafficking, how do you ensure the safety and security of the victims after the rescue operation?
I think it's a little, I don't want to call it rescuing. We use that nomenclature sometimes, but it's really up to the survivor as to when they're ready to leave the environment that they're in. So if we do an operation and we've identified people, we always make sure we have somebody like Unbound or YMCA or somebody present that can offer services and some guidance. If it's something we've identified, kind of a one-off, we've done a reactive investigation off the tip, we do also always make sure we have those same people there. We want to have a victim advocate from our office. If it's child, there's the Fort Bend County Child Assessment Center, but we always make sure that there is somebody they can talk to and they're given all the resources and services they need.
Thank you, everyone. So follow up, we covered this just a while ago, but just to reiterate, Our Voice in Texas is a Facebook group. It's a wonderful group that has human trafficking resources. If you look at the top, there are guides. There are about 5 or 6 guides that you can go through to learn more about human trafficking. We have updates on legislation. I will make sure tonight to post that opt-out option, the legislation that's been filed this session. We also share anti-human trafficking activity across the entire state. Today, I just posted this up on the featured section. This has been released by Texas CASA, and it's Advocacy for Youth Affected by Sex Trafficking. The link is there. You can download it. It's a 94-page book. It's actually a book that I wrote, so I'm very excited of its release. It goes over what is child sex trafficking, what does it look like. It goes into stages of change and how do we advocate with survivors and victims of trafficking. So definitely check out Our Voice in Texas. Utilize that as a group and what you can learn more about human trafficking. Again, we've said it and we've said we're going to say this a couple times. If you see something, say something. If you see something that's going on actively, call 911 if it's an emergency. If you have a suspicion, so many times in our communities we see something that just doesn't look right and we think that's none of our business. It takes a village to raise a child. I'm a firm believer in that. So if you see something suspicious, report it to the National Human Trafficking Hotline. That number is 1-888-373-7888. Here locally, we have an amazing district attorney's office, and also Fort Bend County Crime Stoppers is another organization here locally to utilize. As we close, I want to invite Mark Hanna. He is the chief of the Special Crimes Division of the Fort Bend County DA's office. And that is the division that houses all of the human trafficking work. So I'm inviting Mark Hanna to come on up and close for us.
Thank you. On behalf of Brian Middleton, the district attorney, and I want to thank Rhonda for her efforts to putting this panel together. Mr. Middleton is committed to getting human trafficking out of Fort Bend County. And he does that by hiring excellent prosecutors who handle the cases that come into our office. And he's also been committed to do these community outreach projects. And Rhonda is the chair of this committee that we have, the Fort Bend County Human Trafficking Awareness Team. And she has coordinated a number of these Speak Up events for the exact purpose of bringing these panelists to provide information to the community so that we can prevent human trafficking versus responding to human trafficking. Mm-hmm. And so that I hope that you had an opportunity to take something from each one of these speakers, to offer how they put a personal face on it, to give you information about how you can get involved, and give you information on how you can recognize it when it happens in your community. And so, again, on behalf of Mr. Middleton, thank you for your attendance, and thank you, panelists, for being here.
Thank you.